Hey everyone, I'm really glad you came back to the channel today. If you've been following my stories, you already know I usually share things that sit heavy on the heart, the kind of stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. But today's story is different. It's about love that turned into calculation, trust that became a weapon, and a betrayal so cold it nearly cost someone her life. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones capable of the darkest secrets, and we don't see it until it's too late. Or maybe until we survive it. This is a story about survival, revenge, and the quiet patience of someone who refused to die when they were supposed to. And it all started on a night when the ocean looked too calm to be dangerous. There are moments in life when silence becomes louder than screams. Moments when the person standing beside you, the one who promised forever, becomes the very reason your world ends. Victoria Hale learned that truth at exactly 11:42 p.m., under a sky full of indifferent stars, when her husband placed his hands on her shoulders and pushed. The ocean that night looked like polished glass. Victoria Hale stood barefoot on the teak deck of the yacht, her fingers lightly gripping the stainless steel railing as the Atlantic stretched endlessly into darkness. The wind smelled faintly of salt, and something metallic like rain that never came. Behind her, laughter drifted from inside the cabin, low and warm. Daniel's laughter. It used to be her favorite sound. Now it made something deep inside her chest tighten not with affection, but with a strange, restless unease she had learned to ignore over the past year. She glanced down at her wristwatch. 11:39 p.m. 3 minutes until midnight. 3 minutes until their anniversary officially ended. She forced herself to breathe slowly. "You're thinking too much again." Daniel's voice slid through the air behind her, smooth and familiar, like silk over glass. Victoria didn't turn immediately. She already knew how he looked tonight. Charcoal suit jacket, open collar, sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. Casual wealth, effortless power, the kind of man magazines labeled visionary and self-made genius. The kind of man who had once held her face between his hands and promised she would never fall alone. She turned slowly. Daniel Hale leaned against the doorway, a crystal tumbler of bourbon dangling loosely between his fingers. The soft, yellow lights from the cabin framed him like a portrait, sharp jawline, perfectly combed dark hair, that steady, unreadable gaze. To anyone else, he looked like success. To Victoria, he looked like a stranger, wearing her husband's face. "You disappeared," he said lightly. "Guests thought you abandoned the party." "I needed air," she replied. Her voice sounded steady, trained, practiced, lawyer steady. The kind of voice she used in courtrooms when billions of dollars hung in the balance. Daniel stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "You always loved the ocean," he said. Victoria smiled faintly. "I still do. That part wasn't a lie." What she didn't say was that she loved the ocean because it felt honest, vast, merciless, transparent in its danger. Unlike people, Daniel stopped beside her, resting his forearms on the railing. For a moment they stood in silence, husband and wife watching the black horizon like two actors waiting for their cue. The yacht rocked gently beneath them, too gently, too perfectly. Victoria's eyes drifted toward the navigation lights blinking in the distance. Red, white, red, white. A rhythm, steady, like a heartbeat. "Do you remember our first anniversary?" Daniel asked suddenly. She did. Of course she did. "How could I forget?" she replied softly. "You rented that tiny vineyard in Napa. You pretended you knew how to make wine." Daniel chuckled. "I almost poisoned us." "You definitely poisoned the grapes." They shared a brief smile, one of those hollow, rehearsed exchanges couples perform when they're standing on the edge of something neither wants to name. But beneath her smile, Victoria felt it again. That creeping sensation. The one that had started months ago. Late-night phone calls, Daniel claimed, were business. Accounts that didn't match their official records. A $47 million transfer flagged, then erased. Emails deleted just seconds before she accessed shared folders. Little things, tiny cracks in a perfect facade. At first, She blamed stress, then coincidence, then paranoia, until the day she discovered the offshore ledger. Armayan, 5 billion. Hidden, redirected, prepared. Prepared for what? She hadn't confronted him. Not yet. Not without proof. Daniel turned his head toward her, studying her face with unsettling intensity. You look tired, he said. Long week. Too many meetings. Too many lies, she almost said. Instead, she nodded. Daniel lifted his glass, taking a slow sip. The bourbon glowed amber under the deck lights. Tonight was important, he said casually. Symbolic. Symbolic of what? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket. Victoria's pulse skipped. For a second, she imagined something absurd. A necklace, a ring, some grand romantic gesture meant to patch cracks he pretended didn't exist. But Daniel pulled out something smaller, thinner, a folded piece of paper. He held it between 2 fingers. Victoria frowned. What's that? Daniel smiled. A slow, measured smile that didn't reach his eyes. Insurance, he said. A ripple of cold moved down her spine. What kind of insurance? Daniel stepped closer, so close she could smell the bourbon on his breath, warm and sharp. The kind that guarantees a clean future. Her stomach tightened. Danielle. He reached out, placing one hand gently on her shoulder. The touch looked affectionate. Felt wrong. Too firm. Too deliberate. The ocean wind picked up slightly, brushing strands of her dark hair across her cheek. You know, Daniel said quietly, there's something peaceful about the ocean at night. Victoria didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Yes, she whispered. It swallows everything, he continued. Secrets, evidence, people. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. What are you talking about? Daniel leaned closer, his lips near her ear. About freedom. And then, everything happened at once. His hands tightened. A violent shove. Her body lurched forward. For a fraction of a second, time slowed, stretching into something elastic and unreal. Victoria saw the railing rush toward her, felt her ribs slam against cold steel, heard the faint scrape of metal against skin. And then, nothing beneath her feet. Only air. Weightlessness. Her last memory before falling was Daniel's face, calm, expressionless, almost bored, like a man watching something inevitable. Then, the ocean swallowed her. The fall. Cold. Not cold like winter. Not cold like rain. Cold like knives. The Atlantic wrapped around her body, dragging her downward with terrifying force. Salt water flooded her mouth, burning her throat as panic exploded inside her chest. She kicked instinctively, fought, struggled upward. Her lungs screamed. Her arms flailed against darkness. Up, up, up. Her head broke the surface. With a violent gasp, air rushed into her lungs like fire. She coughed violently, choking on seawater, limbs thrashing as waves rocked her small body against the vast emptiness around her. Danielle! Her voice tore into the night. No response. She spun frantically, searching the darkness. The yacht loomed above her, tall, silent, indifferent. And then, movement, a shadow at the railing. Daniel, watching. He didn't shout, didn't throw a rope, didn't move. He simply stood there, still, observing, waiting. Victoria felt something inside her break. Not bone, not muscle. Trust. Years of shared mornings, shared dinners, shared secrets, gone in a single, deliberate push. Help! She screamed, but the ocean swallowed her voice. Daniel remained motionless, a silhouette against artificial light. Then, slowly, he turned and walked away, just like that, as if she were already dead. Victoria floated alone in the freezing Atlantic, limbs growing weaker with every passing second, her breath turning shallow, her body surrendering inch by inch to the crushing cold. And somewhere in the distance, barely visible through the darkness, a faint light flickered on the horizon, moving toward her, or maybe past her. She didn't know yet, but survival would depend on whether that light saw her or ignored her like her husband just did. Some betrayals end lives. Others create survivors. And sometimes survival is more dangerous than death, especially when the person who tried to kill you believes the ocean already claimed your body. The water was winning. Victoria's limbs were turning numb, not gradually but in waves, like pieces of her body shutting down one by one. First her fingers stiff and clumsy, then her toes gone entirely, swallowed by cold she couldn't feel anymore. The Atlantic at night wasn't just cold, it was predatory. It wrapped around her ribs like chains, pulling heat from her skin, dragging strength from her muscles. Every breath hurt now, sharp and shallow, like inhaling broken glass. She forced her eyes open. Darkness stretched in every direction, except for one place. That light, still there, still moving, a dull yellow glow, faint but steady, drifting along the horizon like a dying star. She coughed, choking on seawater. Help. The word came out as barely more than air. Her voice didn't carry across the wind. The ocean swallowed sound as easily as it swallowed bodies. Victoria floated on her back, arms barely keeping her above the surface. Her lungs burned. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape. She had argued cases worth billions of dollars without blinking. But now, here suspended between freezing water and empty sky, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of dying without being heard, without anyone knowing what Daniel had done, without justice, without truth. And that fear sharper than the cold kept her awake when her body begged to surrender. Memories came like ghosts. Her mind drifted, slipping between present terror and distant memory. Daniel laughing across a Manhattan restaurant table. Daniel kissing her forehead before morning meetings. Daniel holding her hand at their courthouse wedding, whispering, "You and me, against the world." She almost laughed, a bitter, broken sound swallowed by the sea. Against the world? No, against her. The truth settled like ice in her chest. This hadn't been impulse, hadn't been rage, hadn't been accident. Daniel Hale didn't act without planning. He engineered outcomes. He calculated risk. And he eliminated threats. That realization hit harder than the water, because it meant one thing. He thought she was a threat. The ledger, 3 months earlier. That was when everything started to unravel. Victoria remembered the exact moment. Late evening, Midtown Manhattan, 42nd floor. Rain streaked against the glass walls of their office like tears sliding down a mirror. The city below pulsed with neon reflections and distant sirens. She had stayed late, something she did often, reviewing quarterly transfers across the Hale Global Equity accounts. Routine work, safe work, until she noticed something strange. A number, too round, too quiet. 4700万美元, transferred to an offshore shell account, registered in the Cayman Islands. That alone wasn't unusual. Wealthy investors used offshore structures every day, but this account wasn't listed in their official filings. Not anywhere. Victoria double-checked, then triple-checked. Nothing. Her stomach tightened. She clicked deeper into the database. That was when she found it. The ledger. Hidden behind encrypted layers Daniel himself had coded years earlier, back when they still trusted each other enough to share passwords. Line after line. Transaction after transaction. Hundreds of millions. Then billions. Accumulated. Slowly. Carefully. Invisibly. Total value. 25,03,744,7912 $2.5 billion. Hid. Moved. Prepared. She remembered sitting there frozen in her chair, city lights blurring through rain-soaked glass, trying to breathe past the tightness crushing her chest. Because she understood finance. Understood crime. Understood intent. Money didn't move like that without purpose. And purpose like that didn't happen without consequence. Back to the water. Victoria's vision blurred. Her body dipped beneath the surface again. Waves closing over her head. Salt water flooded her mouth. She kicked violently, fighting upward once more. Air, she gasped. That light? Closer now. Larger. Not imaginary. Not fading. Real. Her heart surged painfully against her ribs. Help! She croaked again. Still weak. Still barely audible. But this time, something changed. The light shifted, paused, turned. Toward her, hope dangerous and fragile flickered inside her chest. The fishing vessel. From the deck of the Mariner's Grace, Captain Luis Ortega scanned the water with narrowed eyes. He had spent 32 years working the Atlantic long enough to trust instinct more than radar. And something felt wrong tonight. Too quiet. Too still. Cap? Called one of the deckhands, Marcus, stepping out from the wheelhouse. You see something? Luis didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward, gripping binoculars tighter. At first, he saw nothing. Just shifting black waves. Then, movement. Small. Erratic. Not debris. Not driftwood. A shape. Human-shaped. Turn us 10 degrees starboard, Luis said sharply. Marcus blinked. You serious? Now. The boat shifted direction, engines humming deeper as steel sliced through water. Luis kept watching. Yes, definitely movement. Arms. Weak. Barely visible above the surface. Jesus Christ, Marcus muttered as realization hit. That's a person. Luis grabbed the radio. Prepare rescue gear. Now. Victoria was slipping. Her muscles were failing. That was the worst part. Not the cold, not the fear, but the helpless betrayal of her own body. She could no longer feel her legs. Her arms moved slower with each attempt to stay afloat. The light grew brighter, closer. Voices carried faintly across the water now. Real voices. Human voices. Not memories. Not hallucination. Hey! Someone shouted from the darkness. Victoria tried to answer. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her body dipped again. Water closed over her face. She swallowed salt, coughed violently. Then, everything went quiet. Her arms stopped moving. Not by choice. Bisorenda. Darkness pressed inward. Edges of her vision faded. She thought of Daniel again, his calm face, as he turned away from the railing. No hesitation. Not remorse. Just silence. That memory ignited something deep inside her fading mind. Not fear. Not grief. Rage. Cold. Precise. Rage. And rage, unlike hope, had weight. It pulled her back toward consciousness. Toward survival. Toward vengeance. The rescue. There! Marcus leaned over the railing, pointing frantically. A pale hand broke the surface, then vanished again. Luis didn't hesitate. Throw the line! A coil of rope flew across the water, slicing through darkness. Missed. Again. Second throw. Closer. Victoria's hand brushed against it. Slipped. Marcus swore under his breath. Come on. Come on. Third throw. This time, the rope struck her shoulder, hung there, waiting. Victoria forced her fingers to move. Heavy, unresponsive, like trying to grip steel with broken hands. But slowly, painfully, she wrapped her fingers around the rope. Marcus pulled. Hard. Luis joined him. Together, they dragged her limp body toward the hull. Water streamed from her clothes as she emerged from the ocean pale, shaking, barely conscious. Marcus reached over the railing and grabbed her arm. Got her. With a final heave, they lifted her onto the deck. Victoria collapsed onto cold steel, coughing violently, vomiting seawater, gasping like someone reborn against her will. Alive. Barely, but alive. First words. Luis knelt beside her. You hear me? He asked firmly. Victoria blinked slowly. Faces hovered above her strangers, framed by harsh deck lights. Concerned. Real. Not Daniel. Never Daniel again. She forced her lips to move. Boat. Luis leaned closer. What about the boat? Her voice cracked. Weak. Broke. My husband. The words tasted bitter. Pushed me. Silence fell across the deck. Marcus froze. Luis's expression hardened instantly. Not confusion. Not disbelief, recognition. He had seen storms, shipwrecks, accidents. But this wasn't an accident. The realization, as Victoria lay trembling beneath rough wool blankets, something shifted inside her mind. A quiet, terrifying understanding. Daniel believed she was dead, which meant he would move forward with his plan. He would access the accounts, transfer the money, rewrite history, and frame her disappearance as tragedy. Unless she stopped him. But not yet. Not immediately. Because survival alone wasn't enough. If she wanted justice, if she wanted revenge, she would need patience, planning, silence. The same tools Daniel used against her. Hours later, wrapped in blankets inside the small cabin of the fishing vessel, Victoria stared at the dim ceiling, listening to the steady hum of the engine beneath her. Alive, forgotten, invisible, and somewhere, far behind them, Daniel Hale was already preparing her funeral. Smiling, accepting condolences, claiming billions that were never meant to be his alone. Victoria closed her eyes slowly, and for the first time since falling into the ocean, she made a decision. She would let the world believe she was dead, because ghosts were far more dangerous than survivors. Some funerals are built on grief, others are built on lies, and sometimes the person being mourned is still breathing, waiting in the shadows, watching the man who tried to kill her accept sympathy with dry eyes and steady hands. The man who didn't look back. Daniel Hale stood at the edge of the marina just after sunrise, hands buried deep in the pockets of his tailored coat. The police lights had stopped flashing hours ago. The Coast Guard vessels had already retreated into the horizon, leaving behind nothing but quiet water and unanswered questions. Victoria was gone. That was the official narrative. Lost at sea during a tragic accident. Daniel exhaled slowly, watching faint mist rise from the ocean like ghosts escaping the surface. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind more times than he cared to admit. Every detail, every word, every reaction. And now that it was over, now that the ocean had swallowed his wife, he expected relief, freedom. Instead, there was only silence, and a faint press at the base of his skull that refused to loosen. Mr. Hale. Daniel turned. Detective Marlene Hayes, mid-40s, sharp-eyed, practical, stood beside him, holding a leather notebook. Her coat flapped slightly in the wind. "You're sure you don't want to sit down?" she asked. "You've been standing here for hours." "I'm fine," Daniel replied calmly. His voice carried the perfect balance of grief and restraint, not too emotional, not too cold. Practiced, measured, controlled. Detective Hayes studied him with the kind of attention that made most men uncomfortable. Daniel didn't flinch. "Walk me through it again," she said. Daniel nodded slowly. "We were celebrating our anniversary," he began. "Just the two of us on the upper deck." Hayes scribbled. She stepped closer to the railing. He continued. The wind picked up. She lost her balance. A pause. Just long enough to suggest pain. I tried to grab her, but she slipped. Hayes didn't look up. "Did she know how to swim?" "Yes." "Strong swimmer?" "Yes." "And you didn't jump in after her?" Daniel lowered his gaze just slightly. Calculated shame. "There were guests below," he said quietly. "I couldn't risk both of us dying." Hayes finally looked up. Her eyes lingered on him for one beat too long. Then she nodded. "Search teams will continue until sunset," she said. Daniel forced himself to swallow. "Thank you." Hayes closed her notebook. But she didn't leave immediately. Instead, she watched the ocean, the same water that had nearly killed Victoria hours earlier. "Funny thing about the sea," she murmured. Daniel didn't respond. "It doesn't keep secrets forever." A ripple of tension moved through his spine, but his face remained still. "People fall," Hayes continued. "Storms come. Accidents happen." Another pause. "But patterns," she added, glancing at him again. "Patterns are harder to hide." Daniel forced a tired nod. "Understood." She turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone with the ocean and the illusion of safety. The ghost in the cabin, miles away, Victoria lay inside the cramped sleeping quarters of the fishing vessel Mariner's Grace, wrapped in layers of borrowed blankets. The steady rumble of the engine vibrated through the thin metal walls. Her body still trembled not from fear now, but from exhaustion and lingering cold. Captain Luis Ortega stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're lucky," he said. Victoria's lips twitched faintly. "I'm alive," she whispered. Luis nodded once. "Yes, but barely." He stepped inside, handing her a steaming mug. "Drink." She accepted it carefully. Her hands shook, not dramatically, subtly, the kind of tremor only someone trained to notice detail would catch. "What's in it?" she asked. "Coffee," he said, "strong enough to wake the dead." She stared into the dark liquid. Dead. That word lingered longer than expected, because, technically, she was dead, at least to Daniel, and soon, to everyone else. Victoria took a cautious sip. The bitterness burned her throat harsh, grounding, real. Luis leaned against the wall. "You said your husband pushed you. It wasn't a question. Victoria? Metisgaze." "Yes." Silence filled the space between them. Heavy, careful, measured. "Why?" he asked finally. Victoria looked away, toward the small circular window where gray daylight crept across restless water. Because of money, because of greed, because she had become an obstacle. But saying that aloud would make it real, permanent. Instead, she whispered, "He thought I was a problem." Louis studied her face. "You want police involved?" That question hovered like a blade. Victoria's mind raced. If authorities were called now, Daniel would know she survived. He would erase evidence, destroy accounts, disappear. "No, not yet." She shook her head slowly. "Not yet." Louise frowned. "That's dangerous." "So is trusting the wrong man," she replied. Louise didn't argue. Not immediately. Instead, he sighed deeply, the sound of a man who had seen enough of the world to understand silence when he heard it. "Then what do you want?" Victoria stared at the horizon. Her reflection stared back from the glass-pale skin, hollow eyes, hair tangled with dried salt. She barely recognized herself. "I want time," she said quietly. "The funeral plans." Back in Manhattan, Daniel sat alone inside the penthouse office overlooking Central Park. The skyline glittered beneath afternoon sunlight, clean, elegant, untouched by tragedy. On the desk in front of him sat a folder, black, embossed, funeral arrangements. He flipped it open. White lilies, closed casket, private ceremony, media access limited. Everything precise, everything dignified, everything designed to control narrative. His phone buzzed. He picked it up. Unknown number. Daniel hesitated, then answered. "Yes?" A soft female voice responded. "Mr. Hale? This is Olivia Bennett from Memorial Services. We wanted to confirm the memorial date." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Friday," he said calmly. "Morning. Understood. Would you like to include a video tribute?" Daniel paused. "Video. Photos. Memories. Proof of love. Yes, that would be perfect." "Yes," he said. "Use our wedding footage." He ended the call and stared at the skyline again. Something inside him felt off. Not fear, not guilt. Something quieter, more irritating, like a noise he couldn't locate. Because despite everything going according to plan, he hadn't slept. Not once. Not truly. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw water, heard splashing, felt phantom resistance beneath his hands. He poured himself a drink. Bourbon. Some brand from the Yacht. Amber liquid swirled slowly. He lifted the glass, paused, then swallowed. Victoria watches the world. Without her. 2 days later, Victoria sat in the tiny galley of the fishing vessel, wrapped in oversized clothes borrowed from the crew. The television flickered softly on the wall. Local news. Muted. But captions rolled clearly across the bottom of the screen. Prominent investor's wife missing at sea search continues. A photograph appeared. Her photograph, taken at last year's charity gala. Perfect smile, perfect posture, Perfect illusion. Victoria felt something twist in her chest. Not sadness. Not grief. Something sharper. Detachment. Like watching her own ghost float across the screen. Luis stepped beside her, watching silently. "They think you're gone," he said. Victoria nodded. Yes. The news shifted again. Now showing Daniel. Standing before cameras. Black suit. Somber expression. Eyes slightly red. Convincing. Too convincing. Victoria leaned forward unconsciously. Daniel spoke calmly into microphones. "My wife was the strongest woman I ever knew." Victoria almost laughed. "She loved the ocean," he continued. "She loved life." The irony tasted bitter. "She was my world." That line, that one line, made something deep inside Victoria harden permanently. Not break, not shatter, harden. Like steel cooling into shape. Luis crossed his arms. "That man deserves prison." Victoria didn't respond. Not yet. Because prison wasn't enough. Not for betrayal this precise, this personal, the first real plan. Later that night, alone in the small cabin, Victoria stared at the ceiling again. But this time, her mind wasn't drifting. It was calculating, strategizing, reconstructing. Daniel believed she was dead. That gave her power. Temporary, fragile, but powerful. She mentally retraced everything she knew. The offshore ledger, the hidden accounts, the shell corporations, passwords, codes, backups, evidence. All still existed, unless Daniel erased them, which meant time was limited. She sat up slowly, ignoring the lingering ache in her muscles. "Captain," she called softly. Luis appeared in the doorway moments later. "You need something?" "Yes." She met his eyes. "Steady now. Focused. I need access to a phone." Luis hesitated. "You sure about that?" "Yes." "Who are you calling?" Victoria didn't hesitate. "A lawyer," she said, then corrected herself. "My lawyer." As Luis handed her the satellite phone, Victoria stared at the keypad fingers hovering just above the numbers she knew by heart. One call, one voice, one ally. Someone she trusted more than anyone except Daniel. Until now. She inhaled slowly, then pressed dial. And as the line rang across thousands of miles of ocean and land, she had no idea that the person answering that call was already standing inside Daniel Hale's office. Trust doesn't shatter all at once. Sometimes it cracks quietly, one fracture at a time, until the moment you realize the last person you trusted was never truly on your side. The ringing line. The satellite phone felt heavier than it should. Victoria sat at the small metal table inside the cabin of the Mariner's Grace, staring at the glowing keypad as the call connected. Each ring echoed like a ticking clock. 1, 2, 3. Her pulse matched the rhythm. 4. Click. The line opened. A familiar voice answered. Law offices of Carter and Wells. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Relief flickered inside her chest. "Margaret," she whispered. Silence. Short, sharp, suspicious. Then, "Victoria?" Margaret Wells sounded stunned. Not emotional, not relieved. Just startled. Victoria frowned faintly. "Yes," she said softly. "It's me." Another pause followed, longer this time. Too long. Something inside Victoria tightened. "Where are you?" Margaret asked. Her tone wasn't warm, wasn't comforting. It was controlled, professional, careful. "I'm safe," Victoria replied. "That's all you need to know right now." She waited for warmth, concern, relief, anything. Instead, Margaret spoke again, voice measured, distant. "We thought you were dead." Victoria swallowed. "I was supposed to be." Silence settled between them again, thick and uncomfortable. Victoria leaned forward slightly. "I need your help," she said. Immediately. Margaret didn't respond right away. Instead, faint background noise drifted through the line. Movement. Voices. Low. Muffled. Male. Victoria's breath slowed. Something wasn't right. "Margaret," she said quietly. "Are you alone?" Another pause. Then, "Yes." Too fast. Too clean. Too rehearsed. Victoria's instincts, the same instincts that had protected her through years of high-stakes litigation, began to scream. Danger. Daniel's office. Across the city, inside the towering glass office of Hale Global Equity, Margaret Wells stood beside Daniel Hale's desk, the phone pressed against her ear, her hand trembling, barely visible. Daniel stood inches away, watching her closely, listening. His expression was calm, almost curious, like a scientist observing an experiment. Margaret swallowed hard. Victoria's voice echoed faintly through the receiver. "Margaret, I need you to listen carefully." Daniel tilted his head slightly, signaling Margaret to continue. She forced herself to speak. "I'm listening," she said. Her voice remained steady, professional, but her heart pounded violently beneath her ribs. Because this call wasn't supposed to happen. Victoria wasn't supposed to survive. Back on the boat, Victoria's grip tightened around the phone. She knew Margaret, knew her speech patterns, knew her rhythms. They had worked together for nearly a decade, building cases that toppled corporations and exposed financial fraud across continents. Margaret never hesitated, never paused, never sounded afraid. But now, something trembled beneath her words. "Margaret," Victoria said slowly, "I need access to the Cayman backup servers." The words hung heavy in the air. Even speaking them aloud felt dangerous. Margaret's silence stretched longer than expected. Victoria's pulse accelerated. "Margaret?" "I heard you," Margaret replied, flat, controlled. But behind her tone, there was tension, something pressing down on her. Victoria leaned closer to the phone. "I need you to secure the ledger," she whispered. "All of it. More silence. Too much silence." Victoria's eyes narrowed. Then she heard it. A sound. Soft. Faint. Glass clinking. The sound of a tumbler touching a desk. Her stomach dropped. Daniel always drank bourbon from crystal glasses. Always. Even in the office. Her mind moved fast now, faster than fear, faster than disbelief. She wasn't alone on that line. Neither was Margaret. Daniel speaks without speaking. Inside the office, Daniel lifted his bourbon glass slowly. Margaret avoided his gaze. Her throat tightened. Victoria's voice filled the room through the receiver. Clear, sharp, alive. Daniel felt something flicker beneath his calm exterior. Not fear. Not yet. Something colder. Annoyance. Complication. A problem he hadn't anticipated. He took a slow sip of bourbon, letting the ice clink softly against glass. Deliberately, Margaret's breath caught, because she knew Victoria would recognize that sound. And she did. The moment of realization. Victoria froze. Her mind replayed the noise again and again. Glass. Ice. Crystal. Office silence. Male presence. She whispered carefully. "Margaret, blink twice if he's there. Silence." Then, Margaret inhaled sharply. Too sharply. Too loud. Victoria didn't need confirmation anymore. She had it. Daniel knew, or at least suspected. Her survival wasn't a secret anymore, and that changed everything. Her entire strategy. Her entire timeline. Her entire survival plan. She leaned back slowly in her chair, heart racing, mind calculating, adapting, surviving. "Margaret," she said calmly, voice steady now. "Listen carefully." Daniel leaned closer to the phone, interested, curious, dangerous. "I need you to pretend this call never happened," Victoria continued. Margaret's hand trembled. Daniel's eyes sharpened. "And I need you," Victoria added quietly, "to tell Daniel exactly what he wants to hear." Daniel smiled faintly. A slow, cold smile. Victoria exhaled softly. There it was. Confirmation. He was listening. Good. Let him listen. Because this game had just changed. The first real move. Victoria lowered her voice, slightly steady, deliberate. "Tell him I panicked she said. "Tell him I called because I didn't know what to do." Margaret swallowed hard. "Victoria." "Do it," Victoria whispered. Daniel leaned closer still. Margaret forced herself to speak. "She says she panicked," Margaret said slowly. "She didn't know what to do." Daniel's smile widened slightly. Satisfied. Predictable. Controllable. That was what he believed. Victoria listened carefully to every sound through the receiver. Every breath. Every movement. Every silence. She pictured the room in her mind, Daniel standing there, perfectly composed, perfectly confident, believing himself untouchable. She almost admired the precision of his cruelty. Almost. But admiration wasn't forgiveness. Victoria ends the call. Victoria inhaled slowly. One final breath, then spoke her last words. "I'll call again soon," she said. Margaret didn't reply. Daniel didn't speak. But Victoria knew he heard her. Every word, every pause, every breath. She lowered the phone, pressed end. The screen went dark. Silence returned to the cabin. But inside her mind, everything had changed. The truth became clear. Luis stepped into the doorway moments later. "You look like you saw something ugly," he said. Victoria stared at the dark phone screen. "I did," she replied. Luis crossed his arms. "What happened?" Victoria looked up slowly. Her voice was steady now, colder than before. "He knows I'm alive." Luis stiffened. "That's bad." "Yes," she said quietly. "Very bad." But beneath the fear, something else had awakened. His envy. Because Daniel had made one critical mistake. He listened. He didn't act. Yet. Which meant he was still confident. Still arrogant. Still predictable. And predictable enemies were easier to destroy. Meanwhile, Daniel's suspicion. Inside his Manhattan office, Daniel set the phone down carefully. Margaret stepped back slowly, keeping distance, keeping composure. Daniel watched her. Silent. Calculating. "Interesting," he murmured. Margaret forced herself to remain calm. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the window, overlooking Central Park. The city glowed beneath afternoon light. Alive. Indifferent. Just like the ocean. "She survived," he said quietly. Margaret said nothing. Daniel turned slowly. His eyes gleamed with something dark. Not fear. Not regret. "Hunt. Then we fix the mistake," he added calmly. Back on the fishing vessel, Victoria sat alone in the dim cabin, staring at the ocean rolling endlessly beyond the window. Alive. Exposed. Hunted. But not helpless. Because while Daniel believed he had regained control, he didn't know one critical detail. Not yet. Victoria reached into the pocket of the borrowed jacket she wore, fingers closing around something small. Cold. Metal. A flash drive. The only copy of the full offshore ledger. And Daniel had no idea that she had taken it the night before he tried to kill her. Money builds kingdoms, but secrets build traps. And when betrayal meets billions of dollars, the fall isn't just personal. It becomes catastrophic. The flash drive. Victoria turned the small metal flash drive slowly between her fingers. Even in the dim cabin light, it gleamed faintly cold, quiet, dangerous. A simple object, smaller than her thumb. Yet inside it lived enough information to destroy a man worth billions. She remembered the exact moment she took it. The night before the yacht trip. Daniel had been in the shower, steam fogging the glass walls of their penthouse bathroom. His phone buzzed repeatedly on the marble counter notifications, piling up faster than usual. That had been her first real signal. Urgency. Movement. Time-sensitive transfers. She hadn't confronted him. Not then. Instead, she walked calmly into his office, the one room in their home he insisted on locking whenever he wasn't inside. Except that night. That night, he had forgotten. Or perhaps he had grown careless. Either way, it saved her life. Victoria slid into his leather chair and activated the hidden terminal beneath the desk. The one only she knew how to access without triggering alerts. She copied everything. Every transaction. Every shell company. Every offshore routing path. Every illegal transfer worth billions, including the full ledger that documented the $2.5 billion siphoned into hidden accounts. She remembered her hands shaking slightly as the progress bar crawled forward, not from fear, from certainty, because once that file existed outside Daniel's system, there would be no turning back. The drive finished copying at 98% battery. She ejected it, slipped it into her pocket, and walked away. That single decision, quiet, invisible, unnoticed, had changed everything. Back to the present. Victoria closed her hand around the flash drive now. Tighter, stronger, alive. Captain Luis stepped into the cabin doorway. "You haven't slept," he said. It wasn't a question. Victoria shook her head faintly. "Not yet." Luis leaned against the frame. "You should. Later." Luis studied her carefully the way sailors studied storms, before deciding whether to sail through them or turn back. "You planning revenge?" he asked bluntly. Victoria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed the flash drive gently on the table. "I'm planning justice," she said. Luis snorted softly. "In my experience," he replied, "those two things look the same." Victoria allowed the faintest trace of a smile. "Maybe," she admitted. Then her expression hardened again. "But this isn't just about me." Luis frowned. "What do you mean?" Victoria tapped the drive once with her finger. "This contains evidence of international fraud," she said. "Money laundering, tax evasion, market manipulation." Luis stared at the device like it had teeth. "How much money are we talking?" Victoria met his gaze. $2.5 billion. Luis let out a low whistle. "Jesus." Victoria nodded once. "And Daniel killed me for it." The words settled into the room like a verdict. Meanwhile, Daniel moves first. Daniel Hale didn't panic. He adapted. Inside his Manhattan office, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across polished wood and glass. Margaret Wells sat across from him, posture rigid, waiting, watching, listening. Daniel poured another glass of bourbon, unhurried, deliberate, because panic belonged to amateurs. And Daniel Hale had built his empire on control. "She has the ledger," he said calmly. Margaret's throat tightened. "You don't know that," she replied carefully. Daniel turned toward her. "Yes," he said. "I do." His tone carried absolute certainty. Margaret stayed silent. Daniel walked slowly toward the window overlooking the city. Traffic crawled below like veins, pumping life through steel and concrete. "She wouldn't call otherwise," he continued. "Not without leverage." Margaret exhaled slowly. "What's your plan?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the city thinking, calculating, removing variables. Then he spoke. "We find her." Margaret stiffened. "That could take weeks." Daniel smiled faintly. "No," he replied quietly. "It won't." He turned back toward her. "Because she'll come to me." Margaret frowned. "What makes you so sure?" Daniel lifted his glass. Confidence radiated from him like heat. "Because Victoria Hale doesn't run," he said. "She retaliates." Victoria's new identity. Night fell quickly over open water. Inside the cabin, Victoria sat across from Luis with a blank notepad and borrowed pen. She began writing names. Anne, Anne. People she trusted. People she didn't. People who owed her favors. And people who feared her. Each name carried weight. Each one represented risk. Because trust, after Daniel had become a rare commodity, Luis watched her silently. "You building a war plan?" he asked. Victoria didn't look up. "Yes." Luis crossed his arms. "You gonna tell me who you really are?" Victoria paused, then exhaled slowly. "My name is Victoria Hale," she said. Luis froze slightly. Recognition flickered across his face. "I've heard that name," he muttered. Victoria nodded. "Most people have." Luis leaned back slightly. "You're the Hale from Hale Global Equity?" "Yes." Luis let out a low breath. "Well, that explains the billion-dollar problem." Victoria allowed a faint smile. "Yes," she said quietly. "It does." The hidden threat. Later that evening, Victoria accessed the small laptop Luis allowed her to borrow. The satellite connection was slow, painfully slow but functional. Enough to check headlines. Enough to monitor damage. She typed carefully. Victoria Hale, missing. Search results flooded the screen. News articles. Speculation. Image. Video clips. And then, one headline froze her fingers above the keyboard. Memorial service scheduled for Victoria Hale Friday morning. Her breath slowed. Friday. 2 days away. Too soon. Too controlled. Too strategic. Daniel wasn't grieving. He was closing the narrative. Finalizing her death. She clicked the article. Images loaded slowly. Daniel stood before cameras, dressed in black. Expression solemn. Posture perfect. Sympathy surrounded him like armor. Victoria felt something cold slide down her spine. He was winning. Not financially. Not yet. Narratively. Emotionally. Publicly. And public narrative mattered. Especially when billions were involved. The moment of truth. Victoria closed the laptop slowly. Her reflection shimmered faintly across the dark screen. Alive. Invisible. Dangerous. Luis stepped into the cabin again. You look like you figured something out, he said. Victoria nodded slowly. I did. Luis waited. Victoria turned toward him, her voice calm, precise, controlled. I'm going back to New York. Luis blinked. That's insane. Necessary, she corrected. Luis shook his head. That man tried to kill you. Yes. And you want to walk straight back into his city? Victoria met his gaze. Not his city, she said quietly. My battlefield. Daniel's next move. Inside his penthouse later that night, Daniel stood alone in darkness. The city lights reflected faintly across the glass walls. His phone vibrated once on the kitchen counter. Unknown number. Disposable line. Expected, he answered. Yes. A voice responded low. Male. Professional. We found the vessel, the man said. Daniel's eyes sharpened instantly. Location? Heading north along the coast. Daniel exhaled slowly. Satisfied. Good. Very good. Maintain surveillance, he ordered. No contact yet. Yes, sir. The line. Disconnected. Daniel set the phone down carefully. Victory felt close now. Closer than before. Because the moment he confirmed Victoria's location, he would correct his mistake. Permanently. Back aboard the Mariner's Grace, Victoria stood alone at the railing, staring into the dark ocean that had nearly taken her life. Wind whipped her hair across her face. Cold. Sharp. Alive. But somewhere far behind them, hidden in shadows, another vessel followed silently. Watching. Waiting. Hunting. And Victoria had no idea that Daniel had already found her. When someone tries to kill you once, you assume it was desperation. When they come back to finish the job, you realize it was never desperation. It was patience. The shadow on the water. The night air had grown heavier. Victoria stood alone near the stern of the Mariner's Grace, arms folded tightly against the cold wind. The ocean stretched endlessly behind them, black and restless, swallowing the faint glow of distant stars. For the first time since her rescue, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Exposure. Vulnerability. The kind that came when survival turned into pursuit. Luis approached quietly, boots thudding softly against the deck. You should be inside, he said. Victoria didn't move. I like seeing what's behind me, she replied. Luis followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Just darkness. But then, a flicker, a faint, white light. Far behind them, too steady to be random, too distant to identify. Luis's expression hardened slightly. You expecting company? He asked. Victoria turned toward him. No. Luis stared at the horizon again. The light remained, unchanging, watching, following. A slow chill crept through his spine. Neither am I, he muttered. Recognition. Luis disappeared into the wheelhouse moments later. Victoria remained outside, though her instincts screamed at her to follow. Something wasn't right. Something had shifted, and deep inside, She knew why. Danielle. If he suspected she survived, he wouldn't wait. He wouldn't hesitate. He would eliminate the threat. The same way he always handled risk. Cold. Clean. Permanent. Luis returned quickly. Faster than before. His face looked tighter. Now, drawn. Focused. That vessel behind us? He said quietly. Victoria nodded. Luis swallowed once. It's been there for over 20 minutes. Her pulse spiked. How far? Couple 100 yards, he replied. Maintaining distance. Victoria's fingers curled slowly against the railing. That's not random, she said. No. Luis agreed grimly. It's not. Meanwhile, Daniel watches. Miles away, aboard a sleek black pursuit vessel slicing silently through the water, Daniel Hale stood at the forward deck, coat pulled tight against the wind. The ocean roared beneath steel hull. Fast, controlled, relentless. A man stood beside him, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in tactical gear. Name: Caleb Rhodes. Former private contractor, professional fixer. The kind of man hired when mistakes needed erasing. You sure it's her? Caleb asked. Daniel nodded once. Yes. Caleb studied the distant fishing vessel through night vision binoculars. You want confirmation? Daniel's voice remained calm. I want closure. Caleb lowered the binoculars slowly. Means we get close, he said. Very close. Daniel's jaw tightened faintly. Good. That was exactly what he wanted. No loose ends. No survivors. Victoria begins to understand. Back on the Mariner's Grace, Luis shut off deck lights one by one. Darkness swallowed the vessel. Why'd you do that? Victoria asked. Luis didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied the water behind them again, then spoke quietly. Because someone's following us. The words landed like gunfire. Victoria felt the air leave her lungs. How sure are you? She asked. Luis turned toward her. Very. Her mind raced. Fast. Precise. Daniel knew. Daniel tracked her. Daniel sent someone. All logical. All expected. But not this soon. Not this aggressive. Luis moved toward the storage hatch. We got emergency flares, he said. Life rafts. Basic survival gear. Victoria stepped closer. You think they'll attack? Lijs met haar gazen. If they were friendly, he said quietly, they'd have identified themselves already. That answer carried weight. Final. Unavoidable. The engine shift. Minutes passed, in suffocating silence. Then, the distant vessel changed speed. Victoria saw it clearly now. The glow grew brighter. Closer. Too fast. Luis swore under his breath. They're closing distance. Victoria's heartbeat slammed violently inside her chest. Every instinct screamed danger. Can we outrun them? She asked. Luis shook his head once. No. Honesty. Brutal. Unavoidable. They're faster, he added. Victoria inhaled slowly. Fear surged. But beneath fear came something else. Focus. Because panic wouldn't save her. Planning would. Always planning. Daniel moves to strike. On the pursuit vessel, Caleb tightened his gloves. We're within visual range, he reported. Daniel stepped closer to the rail. Wind tore against his coat. The fishing vessel now loomed clearly ahead. Small, vulnerable, slow, perfect. Caleb turned toward him. How do you want this handled? Daniel didn't hesitate. Disable engine, he said. Board if necessary. Caleb nodded. And her? Daniel's eyes darkened. Make sure there's no body this time. No hesitation. No regret. Just certainty. Victoria's strategy forms. Back aboard the Mariner's Grace, Victoria forced herself to breathe slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Think. Always think. Luis returned, carrying a small metal box. Inside flares. Emergency beacons. Tools meant for rescue. Or survival. Victoria stared at the items. Then something clicked. A memory. From years earlier. A corporate maritime insurance seminar boring at the time. Valuable now. Ships. Tracking. Legal jurisdiction. Signate logs. Documentation. Evidence. She turned sharply toward Luis. "Do you have emergency transmitters?" she asked. Luis nodded. "Yes." "Activate them," she said quickly. Luis frowned. "Why?" Victoria's voice sharpened. "Because if they attack us, I want proof." Luis hesitated only a second, then nodded. "Smart?" "Very smart. Because predators feared witnesses, even wealthy ones." Collision course. The distance between vessels shrank rapidly. Victoria could now see silhouettes moving across the deck of the approaching craft. Multiple figures, organized, professional, not fishermen, not civilians. Her chest tightened. Daniel didn't come alone. Luis switched the radio channel. Static filled the cabin. Then, a voice broke through, cold, commanding. "This is private security vessel approaching your location. Reduce speed immediately. Victoria Froze. Private security. Not law enforcement. Not Coast Guard. Private. Illegal." Luis grabbed the radio. "This is civilian fishing vessel," he replied. "State your authorization." Silence followed. Then, "We are authorized," Luis muttered under his breath. Bullshit. Victoria's pulse pounded harder. They were bluffing, using intimidation, classic tactic, and terrifyingly effective. Daniel sees her. Through binocular lenses, Daniel scanned the deck ahead. Then, he saw movement. A figure, standing near the stern. Small, still, alive. Victoria. Recognition hit instantly. Cold satisfaction spread through his chest. There she was. Not a ghost. Not a memory. A mistake. One he was about to correct. "Visual confirmed," he murmured. Caleb nodded once. Understood. Weapons were prepared. Not visible, but ready. The truth hits hard. Back on the fishing vessel, Victoria stepped forward slowly, closer to the railing, closer to danger, closer to confirmation. She squinted into darkness, trying to see faces, trying to see truth. Then, she saw him. Daniel, standing at the front of the approaching vessel, watching her, unblinking, unashamed, alive, and hunting. Her stomach dropped. Fear surged violently through her veins. But alongside fear came rage. Deep, cold, permanent. Luis followed her gaze. "You know them?" he asked. Victoria didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice hardened. "That's my husband." Luis swore loudly. "Son of a—" Victoria didn't hear the rest, because everything inside her narrowed into one sharp realization. Daniel didn't want money anymore. He wanted certainty. Death. Her death. Again. The pursuing vessel surged forward, engines roaring louder as distance collapsed between them. Lights flared. Voices shouted. Metal groaned beneath rising tension. And standing at the railing, staring directly into Daniel's cold, expressionless face, Victoria understood one terrifying truth. This time, there would be no ocean to save her. The most dangerous moment in any hunt is when the prey stops running, because sometimes the prey isn't afraid. Sometimes it's waiting. Impact imminent. The distance between the two vessels shrank to less than 50 yards. Wind roared across open water. Engines thundered like distant artillery. The sleek, black pursuit vessel cut through waves with surgical precision, closing in on the slower mariner's grace like a predator circling wounded prey. Victoria didn't move, didn't step back, didn't hide. She stood at the stern, exposed, visible, undeniable. Daniel could see her now clearly. Her dark hair whipped violently across her face. Her posture remained rigid, unbroken, defiant, alive, very much alive, and staring straight at him. For the first time since pushing her into the ocean, Daniel felt something unfamiliar stir beneath his ribs. Not guilt, not fear, something far more dangerous. Uncertainty. Luis makes a choice. Inside the wheelhouse, Captain Luis Ortega gripped the radio tightly. "This is civilian vessel under threat," he barked into the transmitter. "Unidentified craft approaching aggressively, requesting immediate Coast Guard response." Static answered. Then, a voice crackled back. Signal received. Confirm location. Luis rattled off coordinates without hesitation. Behind him, Marcus rushed in. They're getting too close, Marcus said. What do we do? Luis exhaled sharply. We hold course, he said, and we make noise. Marcus frowned. What kind of noise? Luis glanced toward Victoria outside, still standing at the railing. The kind that gets witnesses, he muttered. Daniel's confidence begins to crack. On the pursuit vessel, Caleb Rhodes watched the fishing boat carefully. Something felt wrong, too exposed, too calm. Victoria wasn't hiding, wasn't panicking, wasn't screaming. That wasn't survivor behavior. That was strategist behavior. He lowered his binoculars. She's not acting scared, Caleb said quietly. Daniel didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained locked on Victoria. She should be, Caleb continued. Most people would be. Daniel's jaw tightened faintly. She always did enjoy theatrics, he replied. But even as he said it, doubt flickered at the edge of his thoughts. Because Victoria Hale didn't waste gestures. Everything she did had purpose. Always. Victoria's calm wasn't fearlessness. Inside her chest, Victoria's heart pounded violently. Her pulse thundered in her ears like drums of war. But her face remained still, controlled, measured, because panic was visible, and visibility was power. She forced herself to breathe slowly. Inhale, exhale. I think, always think. She glanced toward Luis through the wheelhouse window. He gave her a single nod. Confirmation. The Coast Guard signal had gone through. Good. Very good. That was step 1. Step 2 was timing. The warning shot. Without warning, a loud metallic crack echoed across the water. Victoria flinched slightly. Not from fear, from recognition. Sound carried differently across open ocean. That wasn't thunder, wasn't debris, wasn't accident. It was a weapon, a controlled shot fired into the air. Marcus shouted from inside. They're armed. Luis swore under his breath. Stay steady, he barked. Victoria's stomach tightened violently. Daniel had crossed the line. Not just attempted murder, now armed assault. Public, documented, traceable, perfect. Because every illegal move made him weaker, not stronger. Daniel loses patience. On the pursuit vessel, Daniel stepped forward. Wind tore violently across his coat. She's forcing delay, Caleb said. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. Caleb studied him carefully. You want escalation? Daniel hesitated. Not long. Just long enough. Yes, he said finally. Caleb turned toward his team. Disable propulsion, he ordered. A second weapon was raised, aiming low, toward engine housing. Précise, professional, dangerous. The sound that changed everything. Another shot rang out, this time louder, closer. Metal shrieked violently. Sparks burst from the rear section of the Mariner's Grace. Marcus screamed from inside. They hit the engine! The boat shuddered violently. Speed dropped instantly. Victoria gripped the railing tightly as the vessel lurched. Her body slammed slightly against metal. Pain shot through her shoulder. But she didn't fall, didn't scream, didn't retreat. Because this moment, this exact moment, was the pivot point she had anticipated. Sirens in the distance. At first, it sounded faint, almost imaginary. Then, clearer, louder, growing. Sirens. Multiple. Approaching fast. Luis looked up sharply. Relief flickered across his face. They heard us, he muttered. Victoria's pulse surged violently. Good. Very good. Because Daniel didn't know yet. Didn't hear it yet. But he would. Soon. Very soon. Daniel realizes too late. Caleb froze suddenly. Head tilted. Listening. Daniel frowned. What? Caleb's voice lowered. You hear that? Daniel listened. At first nothing. Then, faint. Distant. Growing. Sirens. Multiple. Fast. Recognition hit instantly. His expression darkened. Damn it, Caleb muttered. Daniel's jaw tightened hard enough to ache. Victoria had called for help before they arrived, before they boarded, before they finished the job. He turned toward the horizon. Flashing blue lights now flickered faintly in the distance. Fast-moving. Official. Unavoidable. Victoria meets his eyes. Across open water, Victoria lifted her head slowly. Wind lashed across her face. Salt burned her lips. But her eyes locked onto Daniel's. Unblinking. Unafraid. Knowing. This time, she had outplayed him. Not by force. Not by violence. But by exposure. Witnesses. Law enforcement. Documentation. Everything Daniel feared most. For the first time since their marriage began, Daniel looked at her and saw something new. Not his wife. Not his partner. Not his victim. His enemy. The pursuit ends for now. Caleb moved quickly. We pull back, he said. Daniel didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on Victoria. Burning. Calculating. Memorizing. Finally, he nodded once. Cold. Reluctant. Temporary surrender. The pursuit vessel slowed, turned sharply, retreated into darkness. But not defeated. Never defeated. Just postponed. The arrival? Minutes later, flashing blue lights tore across the dark ocean. 2 Coast Guard vessels arrived at full speed, slicing waves with authority. Voices shouted. Orders echoed. Spotlights illuminated everything both vessels exposed in blinding white beams. Victoria stepped back slightly as uniformed officers boarded the damaged mariner's Grace. Everyone all right? One officer shouted. Luis nodded quickly. They fired on us. The officer's face hardened instantly. We'll handle it. Victoria watched silently as statements were taken. Coordinates logged. Damage documented. Evidence secured. Everything she needed was happening right in front of her. The real victory begins. Later, inside the small cabin wrapped again in thick blankets, Victoria stared down at her hands. Still trembling. Still alive. Louis stepped inside quietly. You're safe now, he said. Victoria looked up slowly. No, she replied softly. Louis frowned. What do you mean? Victoria's voice lowered. Cold. Certain. This was just the beginning. Because tonight, Daniel failed. But failure made men like him more dangerous, not less. As the Coast Guard escorted the damaged vessel toward shore, Victoria sat silently beneath dim cabin light, replaying every moment in her mind. Alive, documented, protected, but far away, deep inside Manhattan, Daniel Hale stood alone in his penthouse, staring at city lights with cold, calculating eyes. And for the first time since pushing her into the ocean, he began planning something far worse than murder. Not death. Destruction. Totale. Legal. Financial. Personal. A plan designed to ruin Victoria long before she could destroy him. Revenge doesn't always come with violence. Sometimes it comes with patience, evidence, and timing, so perfect that the truth destroys everything in its path, because the most terrifying thing a traitor can face is the return of the person they thought was already dead. The return to Manhattan. 3 days later, Manhattan looked exactly the same. Cold glass towers, yellow taxis, pedestrians rushing beneath steel and concrete like nothing in the world had changed. But for Victoria Hale, everything had. She stepped out of the black SUV slowly, her heels touching pavement for the first time since the ocean nearly swallowed her alive. The air smelled like rain and gasoline, sharp, familiar, grounding. Louis stood beside her, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. You sure about this? He asked quietly. Victoria adjusted the collar of her dark coat. Yes. Louis studied her face carefully. There was no hesitation there. No fear. Only calculation. And something colder. Resolve. Across the street, television vans lined the sidewalk in front of Memorial Hall. Black suits, white flowers, camera crews adjusting lenses, microphones waiting, because today was supposed to be her funeral. Victoria stared at the building silently. Daniel had planned this perfectly. A public display of grief, a symbolic closure, a way to bury her narrative permanently. But today, the narrative would change. Inside the memorial, soft piano music filled the air. White lilies lined the aisle. Large framed photographs of Victoria smiled down at the crowd, frozen in time, flawless, untouched. Daniel Hale stood at the front of the room, dressed in black, posture rigid, expression carefully measured. Around him, Manhattan elites whispered condolences, sympathy, respect, admiration. All manufactured, all false. Margaret Wells stood several rows back, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning faces, scanning doors, waiting, because she knew Victoria was coming, and when she arrived, everything would collapse. Daniel's speech begins. Daniel stepped toward the podium slowly, measured, controlled. He placed both hands on either side of the polished wood surface. The room fell silent instantly. He cleared his throat. "My wife," he began softly, "was the strongest woman I ever knew." Victoria stood just outside the double doors now, hidden from view, listening, each word slicing through her like broken glass. "She was brilliant," Daniel continued. "Fearless. Loyal. Loyal." That word almost made her laugh. "She trusted me when no one else did." Victoria exhaled slowly. Her heartbeat remained steady. Not fast, not frantic. Steady. Because this moment wasn't emotional. It was surgical. The doors open. Daniel inhaled deeply, preparing to finish his speech, preparing to seal her death permanently. "And though she is gone," he continued, voice thick with artificial grief, "her memory will remain with us." The doors opened. Slowly, deliberately. The sound echoed across the silent room like thunder. Heads turned. Whispers erupted instantly. Gasps filled the air. Daniel stopped mid-sentence. His voice died in his throat. Because standing in the doorway, alive, breathing, unbroken, was Victoria Hale. Shock has a sound. Silence. Absolute. Total. The kind of silence that presses against your chest until breathing becomes difficult. Victoria stepped forward once, then again, each step echoing against polished marble. Eyes followed her, hundreds of them, stunned, confused, terrified. Margaret covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Louise remained near the entrance. Silent witness, steady presence. Daniel didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe, because the impossible had just walked into the room. Victoria speaks. She stopped halfway down the aisle, close enough for everyone to see her face clearly. Pale, sharp, alive. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, clear, cold. "You forgot one detail, Daniel." The words cut clean through silence. Daniel swallowed slowly. His hands tightened against the podium. "What is this?" he managed to whisper. Victoria tilted her head slightly. "This," she replied, "is the part where I come back." Gasps rippled through the audience. Phones lifted instantly. Recording, documenting, witnessing. Exactly what she needed. The evidence appears. Victoria reached into her coat pocket. Slowly, deliberately, she removed the flash drive, held it up. Small, simple, deadly. "This," she said calmly, "contains every offshore transaction you thought I didn't see." Daniel's face changed subtly, but unmistakably. Color drained, eyes sharpened, danger surfaced. "You stole from investors," Victoria continued. "From governments, from partners." Whispers spread across the crowd. "Uneasy, suspicious, fearful. And when I found out," she added quietly, "you tried to kill me." That sentence shattered the room. Audible gasps, shocked murmurs, phones recording everything. Daniel stepped back slowly. "You're confused," he said quickly. "You were injured." Victoria interrupted him instantly. "No," she replied. "You pushed me." Silence slammed down again. He had no response ready for that. Not in public, not with witnesses, not with cameras. Law enforcement arrives. The rear doors opened again. But this time, uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by federal agents. Sharp suits, cold expressions, prepared, waiting, because Victoria hadn't come alone. She had come prepared. An agent stepped forward. "Daniel Hale," he said firmly, "you are under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy." Daniel's body went completely still. For the first time, since the ocean, he looked afraid. Not angry, not confident, afraid. The collapse. Handcuffs clicked. Sharp, metallic, final. Daniel struggled once weakly. Futile, pointless. "This isn't over," he whispered toward Victoria. She met his gaze calmly. "Yes," she replied softly. "It is." Officers escorted him down the aisle past stunned guests. Flashing cameras whispered disbelief. The empire he built collapsed in silence. Aftermath weeks later. The courtroom smelled like polished wood and tension. Reporters lined the back walls. Evidence filled the tables. Financial records. Witness testimony. Videosurveillance. Everything Daniel feared. Everything Victoria preserved. The trial moved quickly. Too quickly for Daniel to recover. Too thoroughly for him to escape. Verdict. Guilty. On all counts. Sentencing followed weeks later. Decades. Federal prison. No fortune. No legacy. No escape. Just silence. Victoria's final choice. Months later, Victoria stood alone on a quiet shoreline. Not the Atlantic where she fell. A different ocean. A calmer one. Gentler. Less violent. Louis stood several feet behind her, hands tucked into his coat. "You won," he said quietly. Victoria watched waves roll toward shore, then retreat again, over and over. "No," she replied softly. Louis frowned. "What do you mean?" Victoria turned slightly. "I survived," she said. There was a difference. Winning meant destroying someone. Surviving meant rebuilding yourself. And survival was harder. The final reflection. Victoria stepped closer to the waterline. Cold wind brushed across her face, familiar now, but no longer threatening. The ocean that once nearly killed her had given her something unexpected. Perspective. Strength. Freedom. She closed her eyes briefly. Not in grief. Not in fear. In release. Because the greatest revenge wasn't Daniel's prison sentence. It wasn't his ruined fortune. It wasn't public humiliation. The greatest revenge was her life continuing without him. Later that evening, Victoria sat alone inside a quiet apartment, overlooking the city skyline. Not her old penthouse. Not her old life. Something smaller, simpler, honest. A laptop screen glowed softly in front of her. New documents, new plans, new beginnings. She typed slowly, steadily, purposefully, because this chapter of her life was over. But her story wasn't finished, because sometimes the most dangerous surprise you can give the person who tried to bury you is coming back alive and refusing to stay dead.